Didn't have my first kiss or lose my virginity till 19. Growing up, I always felt like an outsider when it came to relationships. Everyone around me seemed to have their own stories, friends with crushes, high school sweethearts, and tales of first kisses shared behind the bleachers. They were full of excitement, giggles, and secretive whispers that made me feel like I was missing something important, something that everyone else already had figured out. From an early age, I was aware that my experiences were different. I didn't feel the rush to date or to have someone hold my hand. I had friends, of course, but relationships, in that sense, were never something I felt comfortable exploring. Maybe it was because I was always the quieter one, more content to stay in the background, watching as others navigated the world of relationships with ease. While some of my friends were caught up in their first flutters of infatuation, I was somewhere in the periphery, feeling disconnected from the emotions and experiences that seemed to come so naturally to them. In high school, the feeling of being different only grew stronger. My friends would talk about their boyfriends and girlfriends, about their first kiss, and what it felt like to be in love. But I hadn't even kissed anyone yet, let alone been in a relationship. It was almost like I was in a different world, one where relationships were this distant, unattainable thing, while everyone else was living in a reality where intimacy and connection were just part of the experience. It felt like a rite of passage that I had missed something everyone else was doing, but I was left behind in the dust. By the time I turned 18, I had never even been kissed. I could feel the weight of it whenever someone casually mentioned their first kiss. There was always a certain pity, almost like people were just waiting for me to catch up. The more they talked about it, the more I withdrew, shrinking into myself, wishing that I could somehow fast forward through all the moments I had missed and arrive at the part where I wasn't so painfully out of sync with the rest of the world. It was as if I was playing catch-up with something I couldn't even grasp, a game I didn't even know the rules to. I tried not to let it bother me, or at least I told myself I wasn't bothered by it. I tried to focus on other things, my studies, my hobbies, my work, but deep down, there was always this gnawing feeling of inadequacy. Why hadn't I experienced any of these things that everyone else seemed to take for granted? Was there something wrong with me? Maybe I wasn't attractive enough, or maybe I was just too shy to make the connections that seemed so easy for everyone else. The more I thought about it, the more I felt like I was fundamentally different, like I was somehow outside the realm of normal human experiences. It wasn't until I turned 19 that everything changed. It wasn't a dramatic moment, no sudden revelation, but it was a shift that I didn't see coming. I met someone who, for reasons I couldn't quite understand, made me feel seen. She was kind, easy to talk to, and completely unaware of my inner struggles with intimacy. For the first time, I felt like I wasn't alone in this. She didn't push me or rush me, but there was something in the way she looked at me, something that made me feel like I was worthy of affection. It was the first time in my life that I felt that I wasn't invisible. I had never experienced anything like this before. The thought of kissing her, the very thought, sent a rush of nervousness through me. What if I was terrible at it? What if she could tell that I had never been kissed before? What if it was awkward, and I'd somehow ruin it? But she was patient, giving me time to work through my own fears and insecurities. And when the moment finally came, when our faces were close and her eyes were soft with understanding, I felt a sense of calm that I had never experienced before. There was no rush, no sense of urgency, just the quiet, lingering feeling of two people who were figuring it out together. The kiss itself was nothing like I had imagined it would be. It wasn't some perfect, cinematic moment with fireworks going off in the background. In fact, it was clumsy, nervous even, but it was real, and it was mine. For the first time, I wasn't holding back, afraid of being judged. I wasn't thinking about how I compared to others or whether I was doing it right. I was just there, in that moment, with someone who made me feel safe enough to experience it for the first time. That first kiss was a turning point for me. It wasn't just about the physical act of kissing, it was about letting go of the shame and the anxiety I had carried with me for so long. It was about realizing that there was no timeline to follow, no right age or moment to start exploring love or intimacy. Everyone moves at their own pace, and that pace was finally mine to define. For the first time, I felt liberated from the weight of all the what-ifs and whens that had plagued me for so many years. As I look back on that time now, I realize how much I had internalized the idea that I was somehow behind in life because of my lack of experiences. But it wasn't true. I didn't need to have my first kiss or lose my virginity by a certain age to validate who I was or where I was in life. Those milestones were just moments in a much bigger journey, and as I moved forward, I realized that I didn't need to compare myself to anyone else. My story was mine, and it was just as important as anyone else's. In the months that followed, I continued to grow more confident in myself and my relationships. I had learned to embrace the uncertainty, the awkwardness, the vulnerability of being human. I stopped holding myself to an arbitrary standard of when things should happen and learned to appreciate the unique path that had led me to where I was. I realized that life isn't about the timelines we try to force ourselves into, but about the moments we allow ourselves to truly experience, no matter when they come. And when that kiss came at 19, it wasn't just about crossing a line that I had once thought was too far away. It was about stepping into a new chapter, one where I wasn't defined by my past or the things I hadn't yet experienced. It was the beginning of embracing myself, fully and unapologetically. And that, in itself, was a first that I would never forget. As the months passed after that first kiss, I started to realize that the significance of that moment was more than just about crossing some boundary of firsts. It was about the weight I had placed on myself for so long, thinking that there was a right way to live or a right time for things to happen. I had spent so many years measuring myself against others, convinced that I was behind, that I was lacking something crucial. But that kiss, clumsy and imperfect as it was, taught me something invaluable. Life doesn't unfold on a set timeline, and neither do relationships. With her, I felt like I was being allowed to move at my own pace. There was no rush, no pressure. Every new experience, every kiss, every touch, every moment we shared felt like a discovery. I no longer viewed it as catching up to something I had missed out on, but as a personal journey that was unfolding in its own time. And I was finally at peace with that. We continued to grow closer, learning about each other's pasts, our dreams, and our fears. With each new layer of intimacy, I found that I was becoming more comfortable with myself. I had always believed that I had to have everything figured out, that I had to be experienced and confident in love before I could ever deserve someone else's affection. But with her, I learned that vulnerability was not a weakness, but a strength. We built a connection founded on openness, honesty, and a willingness to explore the unknown together. But as with any relationship, challenges arose. There were moments of doubt, misunderstandings, and insecurities that both of us had to confront. She could sense my lingering fears, the ones that came from years of being told that I was somehow behind or that I should have had more experience by now. And there were times when I worried if I was enough for her, questioning whether I could live up to the expectations of someone who had been in relationships before. One night, I found myself alone with my thoughts, reflecting on everything I had been through, the years of loneliness, the misconnections, the constant pressure to fit into a mold that didn't feel like mine. I remembered how I used to think that I was broken because I hadn't had the experiences others seemed to take for granted. But I realized something profound in that quiet moment. The experiences I had gained, however late they came, had shaped me into someone unique. Someone who could offer a love that wasn't tainted by comparison or past relationships. I wasn't incomplete because I hadn't kissed anyone until 19 or hadn't been in a serious relationship before. I was simply on my own journey, and that journey was just as valid and meaningful as anyone else's. I had learned to be patient with myself, to stop measuring my worth against the arbitrary timelines that society seemed to impose. The more I embraced this new perspective, the more confident I became in my relationship. My fears lessened, and I found myself being able to give love freely, without the weight of insecurity constantly looming over me. She never judged me for my past or my lack of experience. Instead, she celebrated the person I had become through those experiences. I began to see my history not as a series of missed opportunities, but as a collection of moments that led me to her, the person I was meant to be with. Our relationship deepened, and in many ways, it felt like we were building something entirely new. Together, something that wasn't based on past mistakes or old patterns, but on the hope and promise of the future. As we held hands, as we kissed, as we shared our quiet moments of understanding, I felt something that I had never felt before: peace. I was no longer in competition with anyone. I wasn't racing against time or against expectations. I was living my own truth, and I was sharing it with someone who understood me in a way that was deeply humbling. Eventually, as time went on, I began to reflect on all the times people had told me, "You'll find someone," as if love was a destination I was always meant to reach. They had said it with kindness, with hope, but it was still a reminder that there was something I hadn't yet experienced. Now, as I stood in the present, with someone who truly cared for me, I realized that I had already found someone, not because I had followed a script or reached some predetermined milestone, but because I had learned to embrace who I was and how I had arrived at this place in my life. Looking back, I understood the weight of those years spent feeling like I was behind everyone else, but I had come to appreciate that there was no right time for love, no set path that everyone must follow. My journey, though different, was just as valid. And in that understanding, I found the true meaning of what it meant to be loved, not for when I had my first kiss or when I lost my virginity, but for the person I had become through all of it. In the end, I realized that love is never about comparing your timeline to someone else's. It's about finding someone who sees you, truly sees you, for who you are, and building something together. I had my first kiss late. I lost my virginity later than most. But those moments were not what defined me. What defined me was the ability to open up, to accept myself, and to find someone who was willing to build a future with me, no matter when those moments happened. And that, I understood now, was the real beginning of everything. As time went on, I found myself more comfortable with the pace of my life and the path I had taken. I no longer held on to the frustrations or insecurities of my past. The journey that had once seemed filled with missed opportunities now appeared to be a series of lessons, each one leading me to this moment with her. She had become not just my partner, but my mirror, reflecting back to me the growth, the tenderness, and the resilience that I had failed to see in myself before. I realized that the quiet, reflective nature of my past had shaped me into someone capable of offering a love that was deep and unhurried. I had never rushed to experience things just for the sake of it. Everything I had gone through had been about finding a connection that was real, authentic, and lasting. There had been no shortcuts for me, no early relationships or fleeting infatuations. Everything had come in its own time, with its own meaning, and it made me appreciate each experience more fully. In the years that followed, as our relationship deepened and we built a life together, I found myself reflecting on the idea of firsts, of the ones that I had once felt so ashamed to have missed, the ones that seemed to separate me from everyone else. But now, I cherished those firsts, not as something I had lacked, but as something we had shared. The first time we traveled together, the first time we moved in together, the first time we talked about our future, our dreams, and everything in between, it was all part of a story that we were writing together. And in some ways, those early years of uncertainty had brought us closer. I wasn't just learning about her. I was learning about myself, about the things I feared, about the things I longed for, about the things I had never allowed myself to admit. And she was there, right beside me, never judging, always understanding. There was something beautiful in the way she held space for my insecurities and helped me move through them, sometimes late at night, when the world outside had quieted down and we lay side by side. I think about how far I had come. How, just a few years ago, I had been consumed by doubts, feeling like I would never catch up to everyone else. How I had believed that I was too late to experience love, to find someone who would make me feel truly seen. But now, in the quiet of our shared space, I realized how wrong I had been. I hadn't been late at all, and I started to understand that. There is no race when it comes to love. We all experience it in different ways, at different times, and in different forms. There's no right age or perfect moment. Love isn't something to be measured by milestones, but by the depth of the connection you share. Looking back, I also thought about the people who had said, "You'll find someone." I wondered if they knew how hard it had been to hear those words, how much they had inadvertently added to the pressure I already placed on myself. But I also realized something else, that they had been right in the end. I did find someone, not at the age society had expected. Not with the experiences they assumed I should have, but in my own time, in my own way. I had learned to stop comparing myself to others and their timelines. The love I had found was not a replacement for the years I had felt left behind, but a beautiful addition to a story I was finally ready to tell. And with her, it felt like everything was just beginning, not in spite of what had come before, but because of it. The late-night talks, the gentle touch of her hand, the quiet moments where we simply existed together, all of it felt like the culmination of everything I had been waiting for, everything I had been afraid to hope for. In the quiet spaces of our life, I began to see that the waiting had been part of the process, part of the journey that had led me to her. My first kiss, my first love, my first real connection, they had all come in their own time. And that timing had brought me to exactly where I was meant to be, not just with her, but with myself. I was no longer the person who had struggled with the feeling of being too late. I was the person who had learned that every experience was valuable, every moment had its own significance, and that love, true, lasting love, could come at any time, even when you least expect it. And when it did, it was worth all the waiting, all the doubts, and all the fears. In the end, it was the journey that mattered, the journey of discovering myself, of letting go of the expectations I had placed on my own life, and of allowing love to come at its own pace, in its own way. It wasn't about when or how I had my first kiss or when I lost my virginity. It was about being ready to experience love in the way that felt right for me, on my own terms, at my own time. And that was something no one else could ever define for me. As we moved forward in life, the years of waiting, wondering, and doubting faded into the background, replaced by the love we built together. And I knew that no matter what came next, I had found my place finally, completely, and fully. As the years went by, the weight of the past became less and less significant. The years of wondering, of questioning when I would experience things like my first kiss, my first relationship, had faded into the background. It no longer felt like I was making up for lost time. Instead, it felt like I was living exactly when I was meant to be. There were still moments where I would reflect on the time before her, the loneliness, the longing, but even those memories had softened. They no longer felt like gaps I had to fill, but chapters that had shaped who I had become. Those years had taught me patience, understanding, and most importantly, the ability to be comfortable in my own skin. I had learned that it wasn't about rushing toward an idealized version of my life, but about finding the beauty in every moment as it unfolded. In our relationship, there was a quiet understanding between us, an unspoken acknowledgement that we had both arrived at this point in our lives through our own journeys. We had both experienced the awkwardness of firsts, but those firsts were never forced. They came naturally, in their own time, because we had grown into the people we needed to be to truly appreciate each other. There was something sacred in the way we had both waited, without realizing that what we were waiting for wasn't just the next milestone, but the right person. We began to build a life together in the truest sense. Not just in the shared moments of love, but in the everyday rhythms of life. We made plans for the future, sometimes lighthearted, sometimes serious. We talked about what we wanted to do, where we wanted to live, the family we hoped to create. And through it all, I realized that every step I had taken in my past had led me here into a relationship where I felt loved not just for who I was, but for who I had become through my experiences. There was a particular day I'll always remember, one that highlighted how far I had come. It was a quiet afternoon, and we were sitting together on the couch, watching an old movie. I wasn't thinking about my past struggles or how long it had taken me to get here. I was simply present in the moment, sharing it with her. And in that stillness, I realized that all those years of wondering when I would finally experience love had been answered in the most unexpected way. The wait, the doubts, the fears, they had all been worth it, because they had led me to this. Our connection deepened with time, and I felt an increasing sense of security in our love. I was no longer the person who struggled to believe I deserved a relationship, a partner. I had become someone who knew the value of love not as something that filled a void, but as something that blossomed from a foundation of mutual respect, trust, and vulnerability. I had learned that love wasn't about rushing toward the finish line or meeting societal expectations. It was about finding someone who appreciated you as you were, imperfections and all. But, of course, life still had its challenges. As we moved forward, I faced moments of doubt, little things that threatened to shake the stability we had worked so hard to build. There were times when old insecurities crept in, when I found myself wondering if I was enough, if I could live up to her love. But those moments were no longer overwhelming. I had learned how to process them, how to talk about my fears without letting them consume me. And each time, I found that her response was always the same: patient, understanding, and unwavering. She had never judged me for my past, for my inexperience, and she never made me feel less than. With her, I no longer felt like I was constantly trying to catch up. I had learned to appreciate the timing of our relationship, the way we met when we were both ready, when we had both grown into the people we needed to be. I no longer saw my past as something to be ashamed of. I saw it as a series of lessons that had shaped me into someone capable of loving deeply and honestly. It wasn't about the right time, it was about the right person, and I had found her. I still occasionally thought about the years I spent feeling like I was behind, but it no longer bothered me. I had come to realize that there was no universal timeline for love, no set age at which we must hit certain milestones. Everyone's story was different, and that was okay. What mattered was the journey itself, the lessons, the growth, the moments of vulnerability and connection. And in my case, that journey had led me to her, and for that, I was endlessly grateful. We had built something beautiful together, not because we were perfect, but because we had accepted each other for who we were, flaws, scars, and all. The moments we shared became the milestones that mattered the most. The first time we said, "I love you," the first time we moved in together, the quiet mornings spent sipping coffee side by side. These were the moments that defined us, not the dates we met, the ages we were when we fell in love, or the timing of our experiences. We were simply two people who had found each other at the perfect moment, when we were ready to love, to trust, and to build a future together. And now, as I look back on everything that had come before, I understood that it was never about when I had my first kiss, when I found love, or when I lost my virginity. It was about finding someone who accepted me fully, and loving them in return. That was the most important thing, and in that realization, I felt a quiet sense of peace. My journey had been mine, and hers had been hers. And together, we were writing our own story, a story that didn't need to follow anyone else's timeline, but one that would be uniquely our own, filled with love, growth, and a shared future.